of said stage, we're with the lovely Sophia, who is a presenter, a musician, and a care experience advocate. All of those things, Sophia, first of all, hello.
Hello.
Oh, that was quite a mouthful, wasn't it? So presenter, musician, and care experience advocate. Well, let's go through those. So tell me a little bit about each one. So what sort of things have you been presenting?
Sure. So when I first moved down to London, after I finished my undergrad, my first ever job was a radio presenter, and I was a presenter of Sophia's Big Band Corner on the Jazz London radio. So I had like this very sort of posh presenter voice, and I don't know where it came from.
That is probably the coolest thing I've ever heard. Okay.
Yeah, and then today in these days I present my own YouTube channel, Care Leaver Sophia, and I'm also the new co-host of the new podcast Who Cares About Research, which I'm sure we will talk more about in this episode.
Yes, we will. Wow, okay. So how long have you been doing presenting type stuff then? So it's a few years now?
Well, yeah, so professionally 2 years, and I've been really lucky because I've had quite a few local authorities and virtual schools invite me to present award ceremonies for young children in care, which is always like really exciting, and because of that I've also spoken at like events and conferences, and everything's just sort of adding up. I'm getting a bit more confidence, and yeah, I really enjoy doing it.
I can tell you are a very confident speaker.
Thank you very much. I like to think so.
And so I'm guessing then that also you being a musician kind of tied into the radio presenting for jazz as well.
100%. Like, I'm so used to being on stage. I've been playing the saxophone since I was 7, so that's 16 years now, which is a crazy long time. Saxophone is my main thing now, and I perform in a 7-piece band with a singer-songwriter that I met whilst at uni, and we've got 3 singles on Spotify, so go check out Jess Fitz on Spotify to hear my sax solos.
Well, I'll certainly ask you for the links for those, and we will put them in the write-up for this interview as well. So I'm looking forward to that. If I'd known that, I would have made you perform for me.
Oh, hilarious, yeah.
Not that you might like my little monkey, I'll make you perform. No. And as far as the being an advocate goes, so is that sort of freelance, or do you work for some organisations?
So I'd say it's mostly freelance. So essentially I'm an advocate in the loosest sense of the word. Like, I'm no way like a legal advocate or anything like that, but I very much speak about my care experience, and I'm very proud of it, and it's something that I try and platform as much as possible, just because I didn't really see many care experience role models when I was in the system. And I have worked as a freelance social policy advisor for a couple of different charities, where essentially they'll ask me to come in and be like, are we supporting our young people to the best of our ability? And I can say, you know, yes, but try doing this as well and it'll be better. And then I also work as a digital coordinator for the IMO Hub, which is a website started by the Children's Commissioner's Office. And I basically get to come up with fun campaigns. We're working on this thing called, well, it's a working title, I don't know what it's actually going to be called, but it's something around care leavers and careers. And we're looking at care leavers more the sort of like middle age bracket, because I feel that once you turn 25, care leavers just kind of disappear, and I'm like, well, what happens next? Like, do we go on and have successful careers? Like, what happens? So yeah, we're working on this series where we platform 6 care leavers who are all working in like very different jobs, and we see how they got there and if they faced any particular like care experience struggles in getting to where they are today.
So you mentioned about targeting sort of middle-aged care experienced audience. I mean, as you probably know, like Rees, one of our main things is that we try to support people of all ages.
Yes.
Who have care experience, and it is really it means a lot to see that there are other organisations and people out there that are starting to realise that actually dealing with certain things from your background, from your childhood, from your teenage years, like it can dramatically affect you for the rest of your life, right? And for all we know, like we are both young women at the moment, but as you know, I think we could wake up on our 70th birthday and realise we haven't quite dealt with certain things properly, could we? So it is so important, isn't it?
100%. And I think what's been really great for me personally is having so many social media care experience contacts, because so many of them, you know, aren't the same age as me. And I remember at the start, when I first sort of got involved with the online community, there was so much talk about the over 25s, and I was so like in on my own world, where I was like, yes, but I'm a care leaver and I'm under 25 and my life is so hard. And then I actually started listening to the older care leavers, and I was like, oh right, yeah, no, this is kind of true. Like so many organizations I've worked with, like it just stops at 25, and I want to know what happens. Like I'm not just making this content for the middle-aged care leavers, I am also making it for care leavers who are younger, so that they can see the people who are succeeding no matter how old they are. So music has just always been part of my life for as long as I can remember, which is a horrible phrase, but it really is. Like I wanted to play the saxophone for years as like a tiny child, and my birth parents weren't musical at all, and they were like, what's wrong with you? Like, what is this? And they bought me a toy saxophone, and I was so sad. I was absolutely devastated. And I remember like the first saxophone I had, I played on that for so long, and it was, you know, like a pretty terrible saxophone, like but it got me to the most amazing places and the most amazing opportunities. Like before university, I won a scholarship to go to music school, which was beyond incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, I have been disgustingly lucky in my journey. And yeah, so music has always been there for me. When I was in care, like if I was feeling sad, the one thing that could change my mood would be picking up the saxophone. And I think it's the reason I actually got so good at music, because of those teenage years where I was in care and just everything around me was just chaos, and the saxophone, like practicing that, was the one thing I could control. So music's been there just for me. Maybe, yeah, it really has helped my mental health. And then in terms of, one more thing about music, I'm also a trustee for the charity Youth Music. And the reason I do that, and the reason I applied to do that, is because music completely changed my life. I went on to Oxford to study music, and I don't know where I would be now if I hadn't, you know, had that amazing opportunity. And I 100% think music education should be for everyone. And it really stresses me out that the government are trying to get rid of music in schools, or at least like people taking music is decreasing, and there's all this stuff around the arts about it not being as important as STEM. But something that I've been seeing a lot now is the acronym STEAM, which is science, technology, arts, engineering, maths, which I completely think is the right way to go. And STEAM is coming out of the sort of Mars mission and looking, you know, at the young astronauts going into space and stuff like that. I don't think people realize how important the arts are. Like I went from doing an arts bachelor's, like an undergrad degree, to business school, and I wouldn't have done as well as I did at business school if I didn't have all this grounding in the arts. So yeah, music, huge thing, part of my life. Advocacy in the care sector, it is both the best part of my life and also the most terrifying. I think putting yourself out there, regardless of how that may be portrayed or whatever, is scary, because you never know how people are going to react. Like sometimes I get really lovely comments from people in care being like, thank you. And sometimes I get comments from trolls being like, you know, you sound too posh to have been in care and stuff like that. And
I know that one quite well.
yeah, and it's an interesting one because I almost value the troll comments I get, because I do have to check my privilege, because I am care experienced, but I'm also white. I also sound like this. I've also had ridiculous opportunities, and I've been incredibly lucky because of the background I came from. But at the same time, like, care was just as bad to me as like it was to like a number of people, and just as good to, you know, some people as it was. Sorry, that didn't really make sense, but
no, it does make sense, and I think, you know what, it needs to be said, because I think this is part of the care leavers community. It's actually a very, very new community. If it wasn't for social media and things like that in the last decade or so, that we wouldn't have actually all been brought together on this scale. So it's an issue, isn't it? That I mean, some people would call it like a trauma competition. I don't know how helpful that is, but everybody's trauma and experience is relative, right? So nobody can say that your accent or something like that makes your trauma less, because who's comparing it?
No. And it's really interesting. It's something, it's language that I see charities using a lot, like the care leaver experience. And I'm like, you can't call it that. It's the care leaver experiences, because everyone's experience of care is so different. Like, I know no one whose story is the same. And it's really interesting looking at a community like ours, because we are all united by this one thing, and it's so special. And as I said, it is the best part of my life, being able to meet young people in care and being able to relate. And even though we've all been through such different things, I can sit down with a care experience person and use the acronyms PA. I can like say something about my childhood and they won't blink an eye, because like they get it. You don't even have to tell them, you know, the reason you went into care or anything. They just get it. And I love that, and I think it's incredible.
I feel where you're coming from, absolutely. And also, I'd like to say that, you know, I think a lot of care leavers that go into an advocacy role or working in a position where they are supporting care leavers with the same background, there is an unspoken sort of duality to their lives, isn't there? So regarding the trials and things like that, just like to say that I'm very genuinely proud of you, and from a very genuine place. I understand that. I think it's hard to know how much to share, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think that's a really interesting one as well, because there's a guy I follow on Twitter who recently said about like the stuff he shared at the start of his care journey versus what he would want to share now. And I feel completely the same. Like on my YouTube channel, the first videos I ever made were very much like 20-minute long videos where I talked about certain parts of my life. And now the videos I make on my YouTube channel are about me watching films about, you know, kids in care and stuff, and reviewing it, because I think like I almost don't have to tell that part of my story right now. The stuff I want to do is change the narrative, and right now to do that I don't need to talk about these random parts of my life. I want to platform other people, and you know, as I said, I'm watching films to change that narrative.
Okay, let's go to now and the present. So obviously lockdown has been a very strange time for everyone, and challenging in a whole spectrum of different ways. And of course, with your work that you do as an advocate, and I imagine with other things as well, most people have had to adapt what they're working on during lockdown. So I was just going to ask what sort of projects you've been working on since, I guess it's March now.
So lockdown it's been a blessing and a curse, which I'm sure everyone's been saying. And I never ever want to describe the global pandemic as a blessing. But what I do want to describe it as is this incredible opportunity that I would never have had otherwise, because it's allowed me to work on a passion project whilst that being my only thing and not having to work as well, because usually like I hustle, like I proper hustle, like I always have a full-time job as well as the children's commissioner's job, as well as doing like all my freelance stuff, as well as being a musician, and like again then doing all the stuff on the side with care leavers, etc. And so usually I've got all of that going on. And so when I started a project that I'll talk more about in March, I didn't have to worry about the full-time job because I was put on furlough relatively quickly, or at least rotational furlough. So my full-time job was communications and marketing sort of head at a music venue in London. So obviously the venue shut. So yeah, I decided to start this podcast back in March. And then since then, I've been working on like a few other projects. So I started the video series on my YouTube channel, you know, former foster kid watchers. I've recently recorded this film called Problem Child from 1990, and I'm still editing it. It is the most offensive film about foster care you'll ever watch. It was one of only 43 films in this world that has a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
I mean, that's kind of an achievement.
Oh my god, it's just not okay. Like it's about, oh my god, I
think you need to send me some links.
I will send you a link. I mean, I'm still editing it, but it will be out like probably before this interview is out. So
okay,
yeah, we'll send you. And then yeah, I've been doing a lot of like virtual recordings with my band as well, which has been quite fun. And yeah, lockdown's been okay. Yeah, I'm just now looking for a new job because sadly my music venue had to make me redundant because, you know, the arts are slightly affected by corona.
Just a little.
Yeah, but oh well, getting redundant at 23 is like a fun life anecdote to talk about in the future. So
and how we got through it somehow.
Exactly.
Yes. Because we can be creative and create money. I know that's illegal, isn't it?
Create money.
It grows on trees. The trees we make in drama class. I'm going to edit that bit out.
Dead.
So one of the projects that you've been working on during lockdown is Who Cares About Research? And I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what that involves and why you decided to start it.
Sure. So Who Cares About Research is a podcast which is dedicated to sharing cutting edge social research with the communities that are most affected by this research. And what I mean by that is, for example, if there's new research about children in care, I want to make this research accessible enough that children in care can read this research and be like, cool, great, who cares? And so every episode we interview some high-ranking researcher at some really cool university or project or whatever, and basically ask, who cares about your research? And they say, oh, you know, like academics, maybe my colleagues, maybe my students, etc., etc. And then at the end of the episode, we ask, who should care about your research? And they can say, you know, the government or the people we're studying or this, you know, for XYZ reasoning. And the reason that I came up with this project is because about a year ago, I was invited to my first ever academic conference. And I was very much invited as like a lived experience quota voice. So I was actually a replacement. I found out like that week I was going to speak. And it was at Fitzwilliam College, Cambridge. And it was actually meant to be Ashley John Baptiste who was speaking on the panel because it's his former college. But because like I'm quite well known as like that care leaver that went to Oxford, Cambridge were like, can you come over and be on the panel? And I was like, 100%. I've always wanted to like go to an academic conference because I had no idea what really happens at these events because they've always been too expensive to attend.
And they're so much fun, aren't they?
No, that's the thing. Like I assumed it was just going to be like really terrifying stuff I wasn't going to understand because I didn't study social policy. So my panel was the first one of the day, but I decided to stick around for the rest of the conference to see what happened. And the second panel of the day was about sort of like vulnerable people going on to university, and I was like, oh, me. And they were talking about all these statistics from these studies which had been done, and I was like, wow, look at these statistics, they're so positive. Like, I wish I'd seen these statistics when I was, you know, going on to university, because I remember in 2014 all my social workers being like, yeah, no, maybe aim a bit lower than Oxford, like maybe look at, you know, universities more on like your level. And so I looked at this research and I was like, yeah, this research must have been done in the last sort of few years. And I looked at the footnotes, and this research had been done in like 2011, 2012. And I thought, but I applied to university in 2014. So what's going on right now? And that's when I sort of started looking more and more into the stats that are out there in terms of vulnerable communities. And the big one that stands out to me is the 6% figure. 6% of care leavers go to university, which is so inaccurate if you look at the bigger picture.
God, yeah. Yes, they absolutely are.
No, 100%. If you look at the bigger picture and you look at taking all ages into account, etc., it's more like 13% according to the latest figures.
Apparently in Birmingham, it's more like 12, and that bugs me. It bugs me that people don't know.
That's the thing, and the problem is because like I see newspapers who are still reporting the 6% figure, and like if you
and
look
charities.
And charities. And if you look at 19 to 21, sure, it's the right figure, but a lot of people don't express that it's that age group they're looking at. The problem with that is the negative stereotypes that comes with that, and also the impact it has on care leavers who are applying to university, because they look at that figure, go 6%. Can I do that? Maybe. For some, sure, it encourages them to, like, you know, defeat the system, but for others, it puts them off. And so I started talking to a number of my friends, because I went on this like social justice week-long boot camp last year where I met lots of people working in various sectors, whether it be with the LGBTQIA plus community or with asylum seekers, with trafficked individuals, with criminal justice system, lived experience people. And I was hearing the same from them. There was so much cutting edge research going on, but it wasn't being spread. And something I've realized quite recently, because I'm about to start a second master's in journalism, is that journalists are they're just normal people. They're just freelancers, a lot of them.
Can I just stop you there? You're doing your second master's and you just skimmed across that. Like, that's nothing. Like, you're pretty special, you know that, right? You're so special. No, you just snort when you laugh, and that's adorable.
No, I didn't snort. I just breathed very deeply.
I won't tell anyone.
She says, keeping this in the video.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've realised that, especially like as I've gotten older, the role of journalist has gotten less sort of like airy-fairy people I don't know to my friends, and I've realised that so much of their research is the same as our research, which is basically Googling. And if this research isn't being disseminated like to the public, then it's not being disseminated to the journalists, which means those reporting on it are sharing these out-of-date statistics. So I wanted to create a project that somehow accessibly shared this research, and that's how I came up with the podcast.
So what was the hiring process like for Who Cares About Research? So because you put together a team.
I realised this definitely wasn't something I wanted to do by myself. I definitely didn't want to present it on my own, because I'm very underqualified for something like that. Because sure, like I have a little bit of lived experience because I wasn't in the care system for years. You know, I was in foster care for 2 years and then, you know, in the leaving care team. But I wanted someone who was researching and studying the system. I wanted someone who could talk to the academics in their own language during the interviews, because I think I'd be a bit sort of scared if I was on my own talking to these academics. So I decided to put out a call on Twitter, and I was like, okay, any researchers who research anything that might have to do with young people in care, whether this be, you know, children in care, care leavers, criminal justice system, and other groups that are related. If you are interested in media and potentially presenting, get in touch. And within like the first few days, I'd had 30 researchers email me. And the problem is I've never done job interviews before. Like, the biggest imposter syndrome I've ever had was conducting these job interviews. Now, I thought when you went for a job interview, they were interviewing loads of people. Turns out you're only meant to interview like 5 people or something. I interviewed 15 people in the space of 4 days. And I can tell you, my mental health by the end of that week was terrific.
Your caffeine intake, like, up here?
Oh, like, yeah, just proper full litre bottles of coffee. And I realised by the second person I interviewed that I couldn't just hire a co-host, because I needed to hire an entire team. So at the end of this week, I hired my co-host, who is Eva Sprecher. She's brilliant. She studies the relationships in foster care experiences, and she's at UCL. Absolutely brilliant. It also turns out we went to the same college at Oxford, but she was 4 years older than me, so we like never crossed paths, but that was a nice sort of thing to figure out later. And she's great. We have really great rapport, which is what I was looking for in the podcast. And then, as well as that, I hired 4 producers who were all like senior lecturers at various universities, and 1 assistant producer who was a care experience PhD student. Unfortunately, one of the producers and the assistant producer had to drop out just because of their schedules, but they'll hopefully be coming back for season 2, which will start in 2021. And yeah, so I put this team together, and then we got our first bit of funding in, which was from the UCL Engage and Train scheme, thanks to Eva. And my number 1 priority was to hire care/lived experienced people to be our artist and musician. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I thought, like, this is the first big thing I'm like, you know, CEO of, or like leading. I want to use this platform to hire creatives, because the creative industry is already so hard to get into. If I have the money, of course, I'm going to look for people who are care experienced, because it's an opportunity I want to give them. So I hired an incredible artist called Lauren Moore, and I will give you her link so you can put this in the post. Please. She's brilliant. She was in care over here for, I think it was like 13 years in a children's home. And then I hired a lived experience musician who was in a children's home when he was younger, and then was later on adopted. It was amazing being able to like give him this paid opportunity. Yeah, it just
it's a lovely feeling, right?
Yeah, it meant a lot to both of us.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was how the team was assembled.
Okay, so what would you say was your biggest challenge that you kind of came across with this project so far?
I think, like, number 1, choosing who to hire, because, as I said before, the imposter syndrome was so real, because I was interviewing these really, not so much famous, but like high profile university professors, and the stuff they were telling me and all of their experiences, I was like, wow, I want to bring all of you on, but I know that it wouldn't be a good idea to have a team of like 15 people working on this, like not for season 1 anyway. So deciding who to hire was like a really big challenge for me. And then I guess doing it in COVID was an interesting challenge. It made it a lot easier because I got very good at learning how to record, you know, via Zoom. So basically we all had microphones at every end. So Eva and I had professional microphones at our ends, and then our interviewee would use like their phone recorder or something. And so then I would take it and then edit and mix and master that.
It's funny, the necessary skills we had to learn very quickly at the beginning of lockdown.
No, 100%. But again, it's made it great because we've been able to interview people in South Africa. We've interviewed someone in America. Last week we interviewed someone, not even last week, on Monday we interviewed someone from Norway. So it's been really great in that sense. August 15th, I got an email being like, congratulations, we're going to announce this in a month's time. And I was like, oh my gosh. And they were like, yeah, we're going to introduce you to like this, because the main reason they want to do this award is basically to make a community where we can meet other young leaders across the world. And it's already been amazing. Like, we started a WhatsApp chat on Tuesday when it was announced, and the people in this group is so incredible, and they're all doing these incredible projects. And usually what would have happened is there would have been an award ceremony in Munich this year, but it's going to happen next year, and I can't wait to meet them all. Like, I'm so thrilled to have been given this opportunity and like this recognition, but also just thrilled to be able to take my work to an international audience now. I've already had like an influx of like international followers on like my socials that wouldn't have found me otherwise. And yeah, I'm just incredibly humbled at this opportunity, and yeah, humbled to be recognized like this.
I hope you're starting to realise that the imposter syndrome is most definitely like,
no.
it's up the wrong tree. Like,
no.
Seriously, I think, and regardless of your reaction to this, it is staying in the video. Like, it is very obvious to me. Like, just listening to you, it's just, I'm just so excited to see what happened, and I want to read all of your research and just keep up with you, because it is very, very rare, I think, especially with a younger generation. Like, yes, there are a lot of people that are very passionate and things like that, but when you actually realize that somebody's got that special something, like, and it is leadership quality, I think it's very special, and it's very nice that you have that.
That means a lot coming from you. Thank you. It does genuinely feel like I put this in my long ass Instagram status when I got the award. Like, it does feel like I'm really on the edge of something, like with the first episode of Who Cares About Research coming out at the end of September. Like, it does feel like I'm on the precipice, and it is a really crazy thing for me to fathom, because as I said, like in the status, like just over a year ago, I was in a position where I couldn't even afford like bread. Like, I didn't have enough money in my bank account to get a bus. And now to be at a point where I'm starting a project is just, it's so crazy. And I have to like stop and like realize this sometimes. And it's this mix of like being so grateful for where I am, but also continuously checking my privilege and being like, you got here through like a very crazy, crazy time, but also remember how you got here.
So regarding top talent under 25, so what do you have any tips for care leavers who would want to take on leadership roles, but maybe, I mean, we touched on it earlier that there is a lack of role models, I think, sometimes, and especially in my experience, I certainly did have not just care experience role models, but with social services or with foster parents. They may have had many good points, but you're very unlikely to find somebody who will push you to go into a leadership role or take on extra training or education to get to those places. So yeah, would you have any advice or tips for those care leavers?
My advice for those care leavers is try and get involved in the social media community surrounding care experienced people, because the amount of times like we talk about inspirational care leavers these days, like there are so many incredible care leaders out there. And I think being in a community that celebrates and platforms these people has made it so much easier for me to go into a leadership role now, because I've seen other people do it and I'm like, wow, you were so awesome and you inspire me to be better. Like, I think it's about experimenting and trying out as much stuff as possible, and it's great that we have things like Rees where you can try out these opportunities. My biggest advice always is just go for opportunities. Like, if I see something, I go for it, and that's how I've gotten so lucky in the past, because I just apply for 1,000,001 things. or 3.
Okay.
And that is, the only person that needs to believe in you is yourself. And that's something that I've carried with me for so long, because from like day one of my sort of like big care journey, when I decided, you know, I was going to go to Oxford, and all my social workers and foster carers at the time were just like, okay, sure, do you mean Oxford Brookes or whatever? And I think self-belief is one, if not the most powerful thing in the world, because if you believe in yourself, I cannot even describe how far you will go. And that is all you need. You don't need some random person who hasn't experienced what you've been through to tell you, you know, oh yeah, you'll do it, or even to tell you you won't do it. You just need to tell yourself, you know what, Sophia, I love you. You've been through so much, but I know that you can do anything you put your mind to.
Well, Sophia, we also love you, and we believe that you can do anything you put your mind to. 100%. I say we, it is the royal we.
Yeah.
I mean,
Thanks, man.
I got you.
You got me.
I think I could happily carry on talking for forever. I really could. But we should wrap it up, and I will make sure that all of the relevant links are in the written up bit on the Rees website. And yeah, I guess we will be watching out for updates from Who Cares About Research very, very soon.
First episode, 30th of September. Tune in.